How did learning your partner's family language ruin your relationship? I downloaded my first Korean learning app 18 months before everything fell apart. Jin and I had been dating for 6 months, and I'd just survived another family dinner where his parents spoke exclusively in Korean while Jin translated selected pieces. His grandmother had said something that made everyone laugh except Jin, who'd changed the subject immediately. What did she say? I'd asked in the car. Jin hesitated too long. Just that you seem nice. The pause told me everything. That night, I decided to learn Korean properly. Not just phrases, but real fluency. I'd surprise them at a future gathering, prove I was serious about Jin, bridge the cultural gap. I hired a tutor named Yoonji, watched Korean dramas obsessively, practiced during every free moment. Jin had no idea. I kept the apps hidden, studied only when he wasn't around, maintained my clueless facade. It felt romantic, like a grand gesture. 6 months in, I understood basic conversations. A year in, I followed everything at family dinners while pretending ignorance, and I started catching what Jin didn't translate. Comments about my appearance that Jin softened into compliments. Remarks about my career being too demanding for a proper wife. Questions about whether I could give them grandchildren. His aunt once said in Korean that my hips looked too narrow for childbearing, and Jin had translated it as, "She thinks your dress is nice." His uncle mentioned Americans being too independent and individualistic, and Jin said, "He's asking about your work." Each mistranslation was small, but they accumulated like stones in my stomach. I started keeping a mental list, noting the gaps between what was said and what Jin chose to share. Sometimes the differences were subtle, other times glaring. When his mother asked in Korean if I knew how to make kimchi, Jin told me she was complimenting my outfit. When his father said in Korean that I seemed too old to be starting a family, Jin said his father wanted to know about my job. The lying was systematic, consistent, designed to keep me comfortable while his family evaluated me and found me wanting. I told myself Jin was trying to protect me from their judgment, but part of me wondered if he was protecting himself from having to choose between us. Jin's 30th birthday dinner was my planned reveal. His mother was hosting at their Fort Lee house, and I'd spent weeks perfecting a speech in Korean thanking his family for welcoming me. I'd memorized every word, practiced the pronunciation until it was flawless. Imagined their surprised faces when they realized I'd been learning their language all along. But Jin had been tense for weeks leading up to it, snapping at small things, working late, taking phone calls with his mother in the other room or out on our apartment balcony. I'd catch fragments through the door, words I now understood like duty and family expectations and not forever. My stomach would twist, but I told myself I was being paranoid, that loving someone meant trusting them even when anxiety whispered otherwise. The morning of the birthday dinner, Jin was unusually quiet during breakfast. I asked if he was okay, and he said he was fine, just tired from work. But his hands were shaking slightly as he poured his coffee, and he avoided meeting my eyes. I should have pressed harder, should have demanded answers, but I was too focused on my surprise to pay attention to the warning signs. The night of the dinner, Jin was silent during the drive to Fort Lee, hands tight on the steering wheel, jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping. His knuckles were white against the black leather. I tried to make conversation, asking about his day, mentioning how nice his mother had been to invite everyone, but he responded in monosyllables, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. When I asked directly what was wrong, he said, "Nothing, just stressed about work." But it was more than work stress. It was the look of a man walking towards something he dreaded, something he couldn't avoid. His parents' house was already full when we arrived. At least 20 relatives crowded into the living room and dining room. Cars lined both sides of the street. Jin's mother, Mrs. Park, greeted us at the door with her usual smile that never reached her eyes, the one I'd learned to recognize as polite disapproval masked as hospitality. She said something in Korean to Jin, and he tensed before responding. I caught enough to understand she was asking where we'd been. They were late. Everyone was waiting. Jin apologized in Korean, and she waved it away, but her eyes lingered on me with that assessing look I'd seen dozens of times before. Dinner was elaborate, the kind of spread that takes all day to prepare. The table was covered with banchan side dishes, galbi, japchae, kimchi, countless small plates of vegetables and meats, and pickled things I still couldn't name after 2 years. Mrs. Park had clearly spent hours cooking, and I felt a pang of guilt for never offering to help, for being the outsider who showed up to eat food I didn't know how to make. I was seated between Jin and his cousin, across from his parents. The conversation flowed in Korean, fast and animated, and for the first time, I understood almost everything. They talked about family gossip initially, normal chatter. Someone's daughter who'd gotten into medical school, someone's son who'd bought a house, a cousin who was getting married in the spring. Jin participated minimally, responding when directly addressed but mostly focusing on his food. I noticed his mother watching him, her expression shifting between concern and something sharper, something that looked like determination or maybe frustration. Then Mrs. Park brought out the birthday cake, and the tone shifted. The casual family chatter stopped, and a heavier conversation began. Mrs. Park said in Korean, "We need to finalize the meeting with the matchmaker next month. The girl's family is very eager." I froze, chopsticks halfway to my mouth. My brain took a second to process what I'd heard, to confirm I'd understood correctly. Mr. Park responded in Korean, his voice matter-of-fact. "Good. This American phase needs to end. He's had his fun, but it's time for a proper Korean wife who understands our values and our expectations." Jin's aunt leaned forward with interest. "Does he know yet that we've been looking? That we've already selected someone?" Mrs. Park shook her head, her tone suggesting this was obvious. "No, but he'll understand once he meets her. She's from a good family, speaks proper Korean, studied in Seoul." She shares our values and our culture. Not like this Rebecca girl who can't even hold chopsticks correctly after 2 years. I kept my face neutral through supreme effort, but my hands were shaking. I set down my chopsticks carefully, focusing on breathing normally while my world collapsed around me. Jin sat beside me, eating quietly, not defending me, not stopping this conversation, his face a careful mask of nothing. Jin's grandmother spoke up in Korean, her voice gentle but pointed. Does Jin love her, though? Love matters, doesn't it? Mrs. Park dismissed it with a wave of her hand, her tone almost pitying. Love is temporary, mother. It's a feeling that fades. Family compatibility is forever. Structure and shared values last. He'll thank us later when he has a wife who understands duty and tradition, who gives us grandchildren who look like us and speak our language properly. They continued planning, and I sat there absorbing every word. The girl's name was Somin, daughter of a family friend from Seoul. They'd arranged for her to visit New York in 3 months, during the spring. Mrs. Park had already worked out a timeline for breaking up Jin and me, making it seem natural and mutual, introducing Somin as just a family friend at first. We'll invite them both to dinner, Jin's aunt suggested in Korean, her voice animated with the logistics of deception. He'll see immediately how much better she fits, how she understands our language, our jokes, our way of thinking, how she respects his parents and knows her place. The comparison will be obvious. Jin's uncle nodded, adding, the matchmaker sent photos. She's beautiful, educated, from excellent family. Nothing like this American. They discussed grandchildren, how quickly after marriage they expected them, how Somin's family was traditional and understood that continuing the family line was the primary purpose of marriage, not this Western notion of romance and companionship. Jin's mother mentioned that Somin was 25, young and fertile. Perfect timing. Jin's cousin asked in Korean if they'd discussed the financial arrangements, and Mr. Park confirmed that both families had agreed on the terms, that it would be a proper traditional arrangement with appropriate gifts exchanged. I sat there understanding every word, watching Jin's family plan to replace me like I was a piece of furniture they were tired of, like I was an experiment that had run its course. My hands were clenched so tight under the table that my nails dug into my palms, and Jin sat beside me silent, eating his food mechanically, his face revealing nothing. Either he genuinely couldn't hear what they were discussing, or he was choosing not to react, and I didn't know which possibility was worse. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes before shifting to other topics, but the damage was done. My entire understanding of my relationship had been rewritten in the time it took to discuss one birthday cake. I excused myself to the bathroom, legs unsteady as I stood. Jin barely looked up, just nodded slightly, still focused on his plate. I walked down the hallway lined with family photos where I would never appear, past Jin's childhood bedroom, into the small bathroom where I locked the door and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked pale, my eyes too wide, my carefully applied makeup suddenly seeming like war paint for a battle I'd already lost. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to process what I'd heard. 18 months of studying Korean, hundreds of hours of practice, thousands of dollars spent on tutors and materials, all leading to this moment where I understood exactly how temporary I was in their eyes. I thought about Jin's recent tension, his increased phone calls with his mother, the way he'd been distant and distracted for weeks. He knew. He had to know they were planning this. The question was how long he'd known and why he hadn't told me. My hands gripped the edge of the sink and I stared at myself in the mirror, trying to decide what to do next. I could walk back out there, pretend I understood nothing, let this relationship die slowly over the next 3 months as they orchestrated my replacement. Or I could confront it now, speak up, force the truth into the open where it couldn't hide behind translation and polite smiles. I dried my face, straightened my dress, checked that my mascara hadn't run. Then I walked back to the dining room with a strange calm settling over me, the kind of clarity that comes when you stop pretending and start seeing things as they actually are. But instead of returning to my seat between Jin and his cousin, I stopped behind Jin's chair and spoke in Korean, clear and precise, my accent nearly perfect after 18 months of dedicated study. How long have you known about Somin? The entire table went silent. Mrs. Park's teacup stopped halfway to her mouth, suspended in air. Jin's face drained of color as he turned in his seat to look at me, his eyes going wide with shock and something that looked like panic. I continued in Korean, my voice steady despite my racing heart. How long have you let your family plan my replacement while pretending we had a future together? Jin stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor with a harsh sound that made everyone flinch. Rebecca, let's talk outside. Please, not here. His voice was tight, desperate, already trying to contain the situation. I switched to English, wanting everyone to understand regardless of their language preference. No, we're talking here, in front of everyone, since they've been making plans in front of me for months, assuming I was too stupid to understand their language. Mrs. Park found her voice, speaking in English for the first time that evening, her accent heavy but her meaning clear. You speak Korean? How long have you been able to understand us? Her face had gone pale, and I could see her mentally reviewing every conversation she'd had in my presence, every unguarded comment she'd made assuming I was deaf to their language. I looked directly at her, meeting her eyes without flinching. 18 months. Long enough to understand every comment about my hips being too narrow for childbearing, every remark about my career being too demanding for a proper wife, every discussion about how American women don't understand duty and sacrifice. Long enough to know you've been planning to end this relationship since it started, that I was never going to be good enough no matter what I did. Jin grabbed my arm, his fingers tight enough to hurt. Rebecca, please, not here. This isn't the time or place. I pulled my arm away sharply. When was the time? When were you going to tell me about Somin? After you met her? After you decided she was better? Or were you just going to let me figure it out when you started canceling our plans and making excuses? Jin's voice dropped low, meant only for me. I was trying to figure out how to handle it. My parents have been pressuring me for over a year. I thought I could change their minds, convince them to accept you. I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp in the quiet room. A year? You've been lying to me for a year while they planned my replacement. Mr. Park stood up, his voice authoritative and dismissive, speaking in Korean. This is family business. Private family business. You should leave our house. I responded in Korean, my grammar perfect, my tone respectful, but firm. I've been coming to your family dinners for 2 years. I brought gifts on every holiday. I learned your language in secret to prove my commitment. I tried to fit into your world, to show respect for your culture. And you planned to throw me away like I was garbage, like these 2 years meant nothing. Jin's grandmother spoke softly in Korean, her voice thoughtful. The girl has spirit and dedication. She learned our difficult language in secret for 18 months. Maybe we judged too quickly, too harshly. Mrs. Park cut her off, her voice sharp. No, mother. This proves exactly why she doesn't fit. Look at her causing a scene, embarrassing Jin in front of the entire family. A proper Korean girl would never behave this way. She would understand her place and accept her role quietly. I switched back to English, looking directly at Jin, ignoring everyone else. Did you ever defend me? In any of these conversations over the past year, did you tell them you loved me and wanted to marry me? Or did you just let them plan your arranged marriage while you strung me along? Jin's silence was my answer. His eyes were fixed on the floor, shoulders hunched, looking like he wanted to disappear into himself. The seconds stretched out, each one confirming what I already knew. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. I was trying to find a way to make everyone happy. I thought if I waited long enough, if I showed them how well you were trying to fit in, they'd eventually accept you, and I wouldn't have to choose. I felt something break inside me, not dramatically but quietly, like ice cracking. You can't make everyone happy when their happiness requires opposite things. You can't have me and your parents' approval if those are mutually exclusive, and you chose. You just didn't have the courage to tell me. Jin finally looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes, but they didn't move me. I do love you. That part was never a lie. I've been paralyzed, trying to figure out how to honor my family while staying with you. I shook my head slowly. Love isn't supposed to paralyze you. It's supposed to clarify things. If you loved me enough, the choice would have been obvious. But you don't, and that's okay. I just wish you'd been honest about it a year ago instead of wasting my time. Jin's aunt spoke up in Korean, her voice defensive. This is exactly why it wouldn't work between you. You don't understand our ways. Marriage isn't just about two people being in love. It's about families joining, about carrying on traditions and values. She would never truly accept our culture, no matter how much Korean she learned. I responded in Korean, my voice even. I learned your language in secret for 18 months. I studied your culture, watched your films, read your history books. I learned the difference between formal and informal speech levels. I understood the importance of hierarchy and respect in your society. I tried to dress appropriately for family gatherings. I brought proper gifts. I learned to bow correctly. What more did you want from me? What test would I have ever been able to pass? Mrs. Park stood, drawing herself up to her full height, her voice cold and final. It's not about tests or language or gifts. It's about blood, about belonging, about understanding that goes deeper than words or study. You could learn perfect Korean and it wouldn't matter. You'll never truly be one of us, and we'll never truly accept you. That's just the reality. The words hung in the air, brutal in their honesty. At least she was being honest now, dropping the polite pretense. Jin looked at his mother, then at me, and I could see him trying to formulate some response that would smooth this over, that would let him avoid choosing. But there was no middle ground left. I looked at him one last time. You made your choice when you didn't tell me about Soman a year ago, when you let your parents plan my replacement, when you translated their insults as compliments, when you let me believe we had a future together. I grabbed my purse from the chair and headed for the front door. Jin followed me, nearly running to catch up. Wait, how are you getting home? We drove here together. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking as I opened the rideshare app. I'll call a car. Jin blocked the doorway, his body filling the space. Don't leave like this. Please. Let's go home and talk about this properly, away from my family. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd been caught rather than a man fighting for us. Move, Jin. Something in my voice or my face made him step aside. I walked past him out into the cold November air, the temperature having dropped while we were inside. The street was quiet, most neighbors already asleep or watching TV. I stood on the sidewalk under a streetlight and ordered a car, my hands shaking so badly I had to retype the address twice. Jin came out onto the porch, his arms wrapped around himself against the cold. Rebecca, please. I do love you. This is complicated. My family has expectations, traditions that go back generations. I was trying to navigate both worlds, to find a way to have both you and their approval. I turned to face him, tears finally starting to fall. You weren't navigating, Jin. You were lying. To me, to them, to yourself. There's a difference. The rideshare app showed my car was 3 minutes away. Jin came down the porch steps toward me. What if I tell them no? What if I refuse to meet Soman and choose you instead? Would you stay? I looked at him standing there in the yellow glow of the streetlight. Are you offering that? Right now, are you choosing me? Jin hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I thought so, I said quietly. A silver sedan pulled up with the rideshare company's logo glowing in the window. I opened the door and got in without looking back at Jin standing on the sidewalk. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, took one look at my face in the rearview mirror and asked, "You okay, miss?" I realized I was crying harder now, the tears flowing freely. "Just drive, please." I gave him my Manhattan address and stared out the window as we pulled away from Jin's parents' house, watching it recede into the distance. My phone started buzzing immediately, still in my hand. Jin calling. I declined it. He called again. I declined again. Then the texts started coming through, one after another. "I'm sorry. Please let me explain. This isn't what you think. I was going to tell you. I need you to understand. Please come back." I turned off my phone and put it in my purse. The driver handed me a box of tissues from the front seat without comment, and I took them gratefully. We drove in silence across the George Washington Bridge, the Manhattan skyline glittering ahead of us, beautiful and indifferent to my heartbreak. I tried to process what had just happened. 2 years with Jin, 18 months of secretly learning Korean, all of it ending in one dinner where my planned surprise reveal had turned into a nightmare. The driver cleared his throat. "None of my business, but whoever made you cry like this isn't worth it." I managed a weak smile. "You're right. He's not." When we arrived at my apartment building in the Upper West Side, I tipped the driver extra and thanked him for his kindness. He waited until I was safely inside before driving away. I rode the elevator up to my floor in a daze, fumbled with my keys, finally got my door open. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. My coffee cup still in the sink, my coat thrown over the back of the couch. Everything was the same, but I was completely different. I dropped my purse on the floor and collapsed onto my couch, finally letting myself completely fall apart. I cried until my throat hurt and my eyes were swollen. I cried for the time I'd wasted, for the relationship I'd believed in, for the future I'd imagined. I cried for the version of myself who'd spent 18 months learning a language to prove her worth to people who'd never planned to accept her. Around midnight, I finally stopped crying and just lay there on my couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling empty and exhausted. I turned my phone back on to find 37 missed calls from Jin and twice as many texts. I didn't read them. Instead, I called Yolanda, my best friend who'd warned me about this. She answered on the first ring despite the late hour. "How did the big reveal go?" Her voice was cheerful, expecting good news. I started laughing, that horrible laughter that's too close to crying. "You were right. About everything." She was silent for a beat. "I'm coming over. Don't move." Yolanda arrived within 30 minutes with a bottle of wine and a pint of ice cream, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, letting me get it all out. When I finished, she poured us both large glasses of wine and said, "I'm sorry I was right. I really wanted to be wrong about this." We sat there drinking wine and eating ice cream directly from the container, and slowly the sharp pain started to dull into something more manageable. "You learned Korean in 18 months, Yolanda said. "That's incredible. That shows dedication and intelligence and discipline. Those qualities are yours, regardless of what happened with Jin." I hadn't thought about it that way. I learned it for him, for them. It feels tainted now. Yolanda shook her head. "You learned it for yourself, to prove something to yourself. The motivation might have been Jin, but the work was yours. Don't let him take that away from you too." We talked until nearly 3 in the morning, and when Yolanda finally left, I felt slightly less destroyed. I managed to sleep for a few hours, restless and full of dreams I couldn't quite remember. The next week was brutal. Jin called and texted constantly. He showed up at my apartment twice, but I didn't answer the door. He sent flowers with notes apologizing, promising to explain, begging for a chance to make it right. I threw the flowers away without reading the cards. I took a few days off work, calling in sick, which I never did. I stayed in my apartment, oscillating between anger and sadness, replaying the birthday dinner over and over in my mind. My coworker Priya eventually called me, worried because I'd never taken sick days before. I ended up telling her the whole story, and she was furious on my behalf. "That's 2 years of your life he stole. 2 years where you were invested and he knew it was temporary. That's unforgivable." The way she framed it made something click. Jin hadn't just lied. He'd stolen my time, the one thing you can never get back. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the birthday dinner, Jin showed up at my office. Security called my desk, and I knew immediately it was him. Part of me wanted to have him turned away, but a larger part needed closure, needed to hear what justification he thought could possibly excuse what he'd done. I went downstairs and found him waiting in the lobby, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, hair uncombed, wearing a rumpled shirt. "Can we talk?" he asked. 5 minutes, please." I nodded and led him outside to a small plaza where office workers ate lunch. We sat on a cold stone bench, several feet of space between us that might as well have been miles. Jin started talking immediately, words tumbling out in a rush. "I never meant to hurt you. When we started dating, I genuinely thought my parents would come around eventually. They seemed polite, accepting of you. But about a year into our relationship, they started pushing harder about marriage, saying I needed to settle down with a Korean woman, that they'd been too lenient letting me date Americans for so long. My mom started talking to matchmakers without telling me at first. Then she started showing me photos of eligible women. I kept refusing, but they kept pushing harder." He paused, taking a breath. "Then they found Somin through family friends. Her parents and mine have known each other for decades. There was pressure from both families. I kept saying no, but they wouldn't accept it. They said I was being selfish, that I was abandoning my culture and my family responsibilities. I cut him off, my voice flat. "So instead of telling me any of this, you just let it happen?" Jin rubbed his face with both hands. "I was trying to buy time. I thought if I waited, if I showed them how serious we were, how hard you were trying to fit in, they'd eventually back down. I was planning to tell you everything, to propose to you, to force the issue. But I needed more time to build my case with them. I shook my head slowly. You had 2 years, Jin. How much more time did you need? His voice rose slightly, defensive now. You don't understand the pressure. In Korean culture, in traditional families, parental approval isn't optional. It's fundamental. Family harmony is more important than individual happiness. I couldn't just defy them without serious consequences. I stood up, done with this conversation. So you chose them. That's fine. That's your right. But you should have told me a year ago when they started seriously planning your marriage to someone else. Instead, you let me waste 18 months learning Korean to impress people who were actively planning to get rid of me. Jin stood too, reaching for my hand. I pulled back. Learning Korean wasn't a waste. It shows your commitment, your willingness to bridge cultures. I laughed, the sound bitter. Commitment to what, Jin? A relationship you knew had an expiration date? A future that was never going to happen? Jin's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I love you, Rebecca. That part was never a lie. I've been in hell trying to figure this out. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who wanted me to make this easy for him, to absolve him of his choices. But your love wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to stand up to your parents. Wasn't enough to be honest with me. Wasn't enough to choose our future over their expectations. Jin went quiet, and I could see him struggling for words that would fix this. But there were no words. I don't blame you for struggling with cultural expectations, I continued, my voice calmer now. I don't even blame you for ultimately choosing your family. But I blame you for lying. For translating their insults as compliments for 2 years. For letting me invest in a future you knew wasn't going to happen. I started walking back toward my office building. Jin followed. What if I told them no right now? What if I refused to meet Soman and chose you instead? Would you stay? I stopped and turned to face him. Are you offering that? Right this second? Are you choosing me? Jin hesitated, and that tiny pause told me everything. That's what I thought, I said quietly. Goodbye, Jin. I walked into my building without looking back. I made it to the elevator, up to my floor, and into the bathroom before the tears started again. Priya found me there 20 minutes later and sat with me until I could breathe normally. It's really over, I said. She nodded. It's really over, and you're going to be okay. I wanted to believe her. That weekend, I started the physical work of ending the relationship. I boxed up everything Jin had left at my apartment over 2 years. Clothes, books, toiletries, a spare laptop charger, random items that accumulate when you spend half your time at someone's place. I put it all in boxes and scheduled a pickup service to deliver them to his apartment. I deleted our photos from my phone, hundreds of them, each deletion feeling like a small wound. I unfollowed him on all social media. I blocked his number. The finality of it felt right and terrible at the same time. Yolanda came over Sunday and helped me finish. You sure about all of this? She asked. I looked at the boxes stacked by my door. I'm sure. We taped them shut together, and Monday morning I watched from my window as the delivery service loaded them into their van. I called Yoonji, my Korean tutor, and told her I was stopping lessons. There was a long pause. I'm sorry to hear that, she said. You were doing so well. Your pronunciation was nearly native level. Are you absolutely sure? I explained briefly what had happened. Yoonji was quiet for a moment. I had a feeling something like this might happen. When students learn their partner's language in secret, they're usually trying to solve a problem that language can't fix. But I want you to know that what you learned, that's yours now. That knowledge belongs to you, regardless of how the relationship ended. Her words stayed with me for days. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, Jin sent one final text from a new number I hadn't blocked yet. I told my parents no about meeting Soman. I told them I'm choosing to live my own life and make my own decisions about marriage. I know it's too late for us, but I wanted you to know I finally did it. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me felt vindicated that he'd finally stood up to them, but it was too late, exactly like he'd said. He'd made that choice only after losing me, which meant I'd been right all along. He needed to lose something before he'd fight for it. I thought about responding, maybe acknowledging his decision or wishing him well. But in the end, I deleted the message without replying. Some conversations are better left unfinished. A month later, I ran into Jin's cousin at a coffee shop in Midtown. She recognized me immediately and looked uncomfortable, like she was debating whether to pretend she hadn't seen me. But I was curious about how things had turned out, so I approached her. How's Jin doing? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She shifted her shopping bags. He's okay, living alone still. His parents aren't speaking to him much after he refused to meet Soman. It caused a lot of family drama. I nodded. And Soman? The cousin looked relieved to change the subject. She married someone else through the matchmaker. Another arrangement. She's fine, I think. Moved to California. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then she said, for what it's worth, I thought what happened at the birthday dinner was horrible. The way they talked about you, the assumptions they made. Jin should have defended you, or at least been honest with you from the start. I thanked her and left. And that brief conversation gave me some closure I hadn't realized I needed. 6 months after the disaster, I got promoted at work. Senior project manager with a significant salary increase and a team reporting to me. Yolanda insisted on taking me out to celebrate. Look at you, she said, raising her champagne glass. Thriving without him. I laughed. Is that what this is? She nodded firmly. Yes. And think about it. If you'd married Jin, you would have spent years trying to win over his family, maybe had kids, built a whole life, and then realized you'd never be good enough for them. You found out early. That's a gift, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. Her words resonated. The pain had dulled to something manageable, present but no longer sharp. I'd started dating casually, nothing serious, just reminding myself I was worth being someone's first choice. I went on a few dates with a lawyer named David who was straightforward and honest in ways Jin had never been. No complicated family dynamics, no cultural expectations creating impossible situations. After Jin's ambiguity, David's clarity felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. Things with David didn't last long. We wanted different things ultimately, but it showed me that dating could be simple and honest, that relationships didn't have to be minefields of translation and hidden agendas. A year after the birthday dinner, I was walking through Koreatown in Manhattan with my friend Priya when I saw them, Jin and his parents, coming out of a restaurant. We made eye contact for a brief second that felt like it stretched forever. Jin looked older, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. His parents spotted me next, and their expressions hardened immediately. Mrs. Park said something to Jin in Korean, too quiet for me to hear from across the street. Jin shook his head slightly. Then they walked past without acknowledging me, and I did the same. Priya noticed my tension. That was them? I nodded. Want to talk about it? I thought about it for a moment. Not really. It's over. I'm good. And I realized I meant it completely. Seeing Jin didn't hurt the way I'd feared it might. I felt mostly nothing, with maybe a touch of gratitude that I'd escaped when I did. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. It was good to see you today. You looked happy. You deserve that. I knew it was Jin. I stared at the message for a while, debating how or if to respond. Finally, I just deleted it and blocked that number too. Some chapters need to stay closed, their endings final and unchangeable. 2 years after the disaster, I was using my Korean regularly for work. Our company had opened a Seoul office, and my language skills made me the obvious choice for liaison work. I flew to Korea quarterly now, negotiated contracts in Korean, built relationships with clients who were genuinely impressed that an American woman had learned their language to such a high level. My boss joked that learning Korean was the best career investment I'd ever made. I never told him I'd originally learned it to impress a boyfriend's parents who'd been planning to replace me the entire time. That story felt like it belonged to a different person, someone younger and more naive. I'd continued studying languages after Korean, adding Japanese and basic Mandarin to my skill set. Languages had become my specialty, the thing that made me valuable and marketable. And none of it was tied to romance or seeking approval anymore. The knowledge was mine, earned through my own hard work, used for my own advancement. That felt like the real victory that came from the ashes of that relationship. Yoonji had been right. What I'd learned belonged to me, and Jin couldn't take that away no matter how the relationship had ended. Sometimes I'd use a Korean phrase or understand something in a K-drama, and I'd remember briefly why I'd started learning, but the sting had faded completely, leaving only the practical skill and the knowledge that I'd survived something that could have broken me. I'd learned Korean to prove I belonged in Jin's world, but in the end, I'd built my own world where I belonged completely, and that was worth infinitely more.